Community connections, CKMS. Local sounds, thoughts, passions, and success. Celebrate local, your neighbor's got a story to tell. Community connections, CKMS.
Happy Monday, Waterloo Region. It is Monday, the 13th of March, 2023. This is CKMS Community Connections. My name is Bob Jonkman. Today we have in the studio Lillie Proksch and Jenna Mayne from the Women's Crisis Services of Waterloo Region. We'll be talking to them in just a bit. In the meantime, we're going to be playing some music by women from Waterloo Region. Listening to Natalia Valencia with her song called Saturday Night.
Walked through the door and shook your hand. Something about you felt so familiar. It's like I'd known you 4 years before. I'd never been to this side of town. Couldn't tell a girl apart from a stout. But with you I didn't have to pretend. You seem to like me for the way
That's Natalia Valencia from Waterloo Region. Her new song, at least new to me, called Saturday Night. Got in the studio with me, Lillie Proksch and Jenna Mayne from the the Women's Crisis Services of Waterloo Region. Good morning.
Morning. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Lillie, you're in the Women's Crisis Services organization. What do you do there?
Yeah, so I am the Senior Communications and Events Coordinator at Women's Crisis Services of Waterloo Region, and I'm also the producer of the Is Your Neighbour podcast.
Oh, you're a producer as well. Okay. Yes. And then Jenna.
Yeah, so a bit about me. I'm the Communications and Fund Development Manager at Women's Crisis Services, and I host the podcast, Is Your Neighbour.
Ah, okay. I thought you were actually the producer, so put me straight on that.
Yeah, we're straight on that. We do a little bit of producing as well, actually. Okay. So, yeah, we're all hands on deck at a nonprofit, you know?
Yeah, I know how that goes. What does the Women's Crisis Services of Waterloo Region do? What's the purpose of the organization?
Yeah, so we support women and children who are experiencing domestic violence in Waterloo region. When we're talking about domestic violence, I think it's really important to recognize that there's many different types. I think a lot of people think of physical abuse or violence when we talk about it, but there's also emotional, financial, psychological, coercive control. So it's important we think about the different types as well. So the way that we do support women and kids is through emergency shelter, outreach services, transitional housing, and through other support services as well.
Okay. What does that involve, the housing, the temporary shelter? Is that similar to the shelter that's being offered for unhoused people in Waterloo region?
Yeah, similar, but it's a bit different. So we have two shelters. We have Haven House in Cambridge, and we have Anselma House in Kitchener. And each shelter, we have a total of 90 beds. So there's 45 beds at each shelter. So I find people are sometimes surprised. We're quite large. And at any given time, we are pretty much at capacity. So there is a real need for these shelter services. Something that's a bit different maybe is the people who stay with us, they typically stay for longer periods of time. And we're set up really well, too. So I think a lot of people, when they think of a shelter, they might not think of the type of buildings we have. So they're set up hotel style. Every person has their own room with an adjoining bathroom. And if a woman comes with multiple children, we also have doors that open to other rooms, so the rooms can be adjoining. So that's a nice feature as well.
Suites rather than just individual rooms. Okay, very nice. And how long are the stays for those emergency shelters?
Typically the stay pre-COVID would be between 8 and 12 weeks. Because of the housing crisis, that stay has lengthened to between 8 and 12 months, which has caused kind of a little bit of a backup in the system, which is actually why we started our transitional housing program as well. So in August, we started this program and we opened Aspen Place, which is a home to, there's 3 units and can house up to 12 people at a time. And through that program, we've already housed 5 moms and 13 children who have gone on to more permanent housing from there.
Okay. And is that housing that you arrange for them?
Aspen Place is. The more independent living after Aspen Place is through the region.
Okay. And then you said something about housing placement as well.
Yeah, so our housing workers will help women secure housing too. Sometimes it can be difficult to locate housing, if a lot of the times there's different kind of forms you need, or you might need proof of residency or things like that. But when women are in an abusive relationship, sometimes you don't have your name on the bills if there's financial abuse. So it can be.
I guess that's one of the ways of implementing that abuse is by denying women their autonomy.
Yeah, exactly. So it makes it really difficult to leave because of that kind of power control over the woman. So we do work with women and kind of try and help them find housing through the region. If they can't find that, we will also help them find it more independently as well. So they do have to be actively looking on their own, but we do have workers who will assist them with that.
Okay. And then they find housing within the region generally, right?
Typically, yeah. Sometimes women will move outside the region, but usually they kind of want to stay, try and, if they have children, keep their kids in a similar school district, that kind of thing.
So the housing market is really awful. I mean, things are really, really expensive. Has that affected how you do your work?
Yeah, I think it has, and that's why this transitional housing has been so important too. We've kind of had a bit of a backlog, so women have been in our emergency shelters, but we're not able to get them out into independent living. So because of that, we needed to start this new transitional housing program, and it also helps give the women a bit more support. So instead of just staying in an emergency shelter where you're used to living in this environment with lots of support workers and other community members, women and kids, then they kind of go out on their own right after that, right? So the transitional housing is a really nice step, kind of a more of a warm transfer handoff, and we do have programming there as well.
Right. And you said that there's a backlog. So what happens to women who need emergency support, but you're full?
So we do have outreach services. The need for our outreach services have gone up. We've seen an increase, 92% increase in the last 2 years. So it's quite significant. Yeah.
Is that COVID related?
Yeah, it's COVID related. Just a lot of stresses, I think, outside stresses that are impacting relationships. But the outreach services, so women do not need to be staying in our shelters to access our services. If they're not ready to leave the relationship yet, or if they need help safety planning to find a safe way to leave, we can help them with that. or if they've already stayed in our shelters but need further ongoing support afterwards, they can have a support worker through outreach as well.
Okay. For everybody listening, how do people get a hold of you to get that emergency support?
We have 2 support lines, and we also have an online chat. So if you visit our website, if you Google Women's Crisis Services, it'll come up right away. You can find our support lines right there, and or use our online chat if that's more convenient for you.
Do you have the numbers handy for the crisis center? If not, I should have them here on the
Yeah,
on the
we
page.
have them right here. So
Okay.
it's 519-742-5894. That's one of the numbers. Another number is 519-653-2422.
Okay. And then online as well, you've got the WCSWR.org website, which has this handy little online button to bring up a chat thing. And how secure is that? Is that open to snooping or?
No. So this online chat was actually implemented right at the start of COVID. As soon as the first lockdown happened, within 48 hours, we were able to get that up onto our website.
Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah, and one of the main reasons for that is usually when women would leave, they would typically leave when their partner was at work. But because of the work from home order, a lot of folks didn't have that opportunity to make those calls. So having this online chat is really giving them the opportunity to talk anonymously to a support worker, and they talk directly to a social worker. And then our website also has a safety exit. So as soon as, or if there is any worry of their partner seeing what they're doing, they can go and push that safety exit button, and then all of the history from our website will be deleted off of their device.
Really? That's very good, because I guess that prevents people from, the abusers from finding out that they're looking for an escape, which might instigate more abuse.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Very nice. All right. You have a podcast. You're both producing a podcast.
Yes.
And how does that relate to the services that you're offering?
Yeah, so our podcast is called Is Your Neighbour, and we started this a few years ago because we really wanted to talk about the fact that domestic violence is happening to people in all different neighborhoods. Doesn't matter your background. We were finding that, sometimes when people think of domestic violence, they think of a certain type of woman who might be experiencing it, or they might have a certain idea of what abuse looks like. And we really wanted to bring awareness to the fact that it can look like a lot of different things. There's many different types. It impacts people of all different backgrounds and all different neighborhoods. And we also really wanted to bring a face and a voice to the issue too. We find, sometimes this gets talked about on the news, but you'll see those standard stock images of, women crying in the shadows, and it's not very empowering. And it's not really what we're seeing with the women we work with. These are really strong women who get through these situations.
Yes.
And we really wanted to highlight this by showing people's faces with the podcast. Like we have a professional photographer, Hillary Gald. She's in this building as well,
Oh, is she?
actually.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
one for the wall.
Yeah.
So she kind of takes pictures of all of our guests, and we really want them to be able to share their stories in their own words too.
So the podcast then isn't really aimed at the clients that you provide services to. It's meant at the general public to better understand the issues that these people are facing.
Yeah, I think it's both. I think we have a lot of survivors and people experiencing domestic violence or who have experienced it who listen in and they say, they feel really validated when they listen to these stories.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think
As
it's
in,
really helps
they're not
them.
the only ones that are experiencing it, and a
Exactly.
bit of company in their experience.
Yeah, knowing you're not alone, kind of helpful in their healing journey. But yeah, also for general public too, to kind of recognize that, our tagline is we all have a role to play in ending
Right.
domestic violence, and we really do think there is something all of us can do. It might seem small compared to some things that other people are doing, but I think there is something we can all do.
Right. This is season 4 already. You've done this 3 years previously, and you're into season 4, so well done. Not all podcasts last that long.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Your current season's theme is femicide.
Right, yeah. So this new season is called Understanding Femicide.
Understanding Femicide.
So it's a 6-episode series, and we talk about what happens when domestic violence and stalking becomes lethal. So it is a heavy topic, but we do try and really break it down and make it digestible just the same. You know, we hear stories from survivors, from experts, and from family members who have actually lost women and girls to femicide. So we really want people to listen in, have a better understanding of what femicide is, so then we can help prevent it.
And how serious the issue of abuse can possibly be. Yeah. Want me to play the trailer?
Yeah, that
We
would be
have
great.
a trailer of Understanding Femicide, Women's Crisis Services of Waterloo Region, and their podcast, Understanding Femicide.
The evening he called, he threatened my mother and told her that she wouldn't live to see her next birthday and that he wouldn't live to see his either.
There'll be simple things. It can be a smell, a situation, a song, someone's voice, a loud noise, and those will still always be imprints on each of us.
Kira was really just a bright-eyed, beautiful child. She was an animal lover. She would rhyme. She would have poems. She would do art. She was really good at math. She would have done great things had she been given the opportunity. You know, I have no doubt.
We all have a role to play in ending domestic violence. Tune into the new She Is Your Neighbor series, Understanding Femicide, available wherever you get your podcasts.
And one of the places you can catch the
Kira
podcast...
was really just a bright-eyed...
one of the places you can catch the podcast is right here on CKMS FM. We'll be airing the first episodes today at 1 p.m. So stay tuned, and you'll catch the first episode. You say wherever you catch your podcasts, what are the other places where the podcast exists?
Yeah, so folks can listen to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, really any places that podcasts are shown. And then we also have our website, so www.sheisyourneighbor.com.
Had a look at that in just a bit. Got a nice picture on there of one of your guests on the podcast. That's Dr. Jennifer Kagan-Viator. And so that's the second episode that she appears in.
Yeah, that's correct. Jennifer, she's just really amazing. I'd encourage anyone listening to tune into her story. If you haven't read about her in the news, Jennifer, a few years ago, she lost her daughter, Kira, actually. She was only 4 years old, and she was actually killed by her father. And it was an act of revenge against Jennifer. So it's quite a tragic story, but it's also really inspiring to hear what Jennifer's been able to do since then. She's been advocating for Kira's Law, so that judges will receive mandatory training on domestic violence and coercive control, so we can hopefully prevent these tragedies from happening to any other families like hers in the future.
Right. And is that sort of the thrust of the podcast, is to identify what changes need to be made and to help make those changes take place?
Yeah, and I think the other thing is just general education. So we also talk about the definition of femicide, which I'll share now actually, which
Sure.
It's all killings of women and girls that involve sex or gender-related motivations or indicators. So we know that women and girls are most likely to be killed by those closest to them, usually an intimate partner or family member. And the other thing is femicide is really bringing attention to men's violence. So it's not just about how someone lost their life, it's about who took their life. So it is heavy subject matter, but we are hoping, these stories are still motivating. It's an unfortunate reality. It's something I think we have to talk about, even though it's difficult.
Right.
But I think we do try and keep it hopeful. And, in the episodes, we do try and share that there is something we all can do. Another episode is with Fallon Farinacci. Maybe Lillie wants to share a bit about that.
Sure.
Yeah, so Fallon is actually a Métis woman, an advocate, and she lost her parents by her mother's stalker when she was just 8 years old. So her mother actually had a stalker, and it was a family friend, and unfortunately he had broken into their home and taken Fallon and Fallon's brothers hostage, and then killed both of her parents. But from there, when Fallon was 38 years old, she had actually surpassed the age of both of her parents and her older brother. and she became the oldest member of her family. And she did a fundraiser in support of Indigenous women who are experiencing violence and raised over $100,000 for Indigenous women, both in the Niagara region where she currently lives and back in her hometown as well.
Right, this is a very, very heavy topic.
It is heavy. And Fallon, I think if you do tune into the podcast, you'll see the guests kind of have a way of bringing it full circle, though. And I think, you know, Fallon, it's very motivating. Like, she talks about how she had a lot of survivor's guilt for a long time. You know, why me? Why did I get to survive? And I think for anyone listening who may have gone through this, it's good to know they're kind of not alone, but it's also helpful for other people who haven't gone through it to kind of understand what this actually looks like, and that these are real stories happening to real people who live around us. So even though they're tragic stories, I think it is amazing to see how Fallon and Jennifer have been able to move forward, and they're really, you know, taking action and trying to do something about this.
Yeah. You have a clip from Fallon as well. Yeah, play that?
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
My name is Fallon Farinacci. My spirit name is White Thunder Woman. The elder who gifted me my name said that I'm here to make a lot of noise. I used to say I plan to do just that, but I feel like I'm actually in the moment of doing that and using my voice. It doesn't matter if you were in that life or not. No one deserves what my story is. The evening he called, he threatened my mother and told her that she wouldn't live to see her next birthday and that he wouldn't live to see his either. When he went before a judge, the RCMP failed to mention my mother's concerns in her statement, which were she was worried he had a .22 caliber rifle. And they did not tell the judge this, nor was there a seizure of any weapons, a search of his home, nothing like that. My story has used me for so many years, trauma, hurt, grief, that I'm going to use my story for change.
Powerful stuff. That's the episode we'll be hearing later today at 1 p.m. That's Fallon Farinacci, and she's not from the Waterloo region. She's from Niagara, you said.
Yeah, and I think with Fallon's story too, again, I know it is really heavy stuff, but the other thing I kind of wanted to mention was, you know, we know that femicide is a big issue, and this is why we need to talk about it. We're not talking about it to scare people or anything, but, you know, last year in Ontario, there were 52 femicides in 52 weeks. And,
wow.
You know, we just feel like it's not being talked about enough.
We don't hear the word very often. We hear homicide, which seems to relate strictly to men, perhaps. I'm not entirely sure if that's etymologically correct. But the word femicide is hardly ever heard in mainstream media.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why we think we need to use it a little more to kind of bring attention to what this issue is, right? You know, we know already, for example, in Quebec, by January 25th this year, there had already been 5 women killed, or 5 murders in Quebec, and they had all been women.
Yeah.
So it's something we need to talk about. It's a growing issue impacting women and girls. So I think that's why we need to use the term femicide as well and really highlight what's going on.
Right. I guess once you can identify it, then there's a better means of, or a better handle on solving the problem. Yeah. Before the pandemic hit, did you see a difference in the work that you were doing? Did it make a difference in how women were being treated? Or have things just been escalating and getting worse, and doubly so during the pandemic?
Yeah, and I think the other thing is they've been getting worse, but I think it's also people don't always know that they can reach out for support. So sometimes even our statistics and our rates, it's difficult to know who's actually experiencing this because not everybody reports or reaches out for help either. There's a lot of shame and stigma surrounding domestic violence, and a lot of people don't know that there is support out there. They might be afraid to call the police or afraid to come to an emergency shelter because they don't know what it's all about. So sometimes the numbers too don't even show the extent of the problem. So we only know what it is that we're seeing, but we're trying to make an impact.
Like with unhoused people, there's a lot of hidden violence that never sees the light of day.
Yeah, and in people's houses too, right? I think it's not just people who it's all sorts of people that this happens to too, right? From all different backgrounds, wealthy people, we have all sorts of people who come to our shelters. We even have older women. That's something that doesn't get talked about a lot either, is sometimes we have older women who stay in our shelters because they might have abusive sons or other men in their lives. So it's not just kind of the stereotypical woman either.
Yeah. Does it happen in same-sex relationships as well? Is there violence, domestic violence in same-sex relationships?
Yep, there is. I think there is. All relationships, this can happen in any relationship. We do definitely see it happening disproportionately to women by men, though.
Yeah. I believe that. That's it seems to be the common perception of it as well, I think. So.
Yeah. And we're lucky too. We have a lot of really great male allies and supporters too.
Yeah.
We try and always have men on the podcast when we can, because we think it helps to kind of bring them into the conversation too. And that's why it's nice to talk to you about it too, because I don't think it's just something that women need to be talking about, right? It's something we all can do something about it. Sometimes it's simple as planting a seed, kind of recognizing the signs, so that if you have a friend or family member, you think maybe something's going on there. You can't always just ask them to leave the relationship right away. It's not as simple as that. But I think if you kind of start planting seeds, tell them about our support lines, and it might take a while. You might have to be patient with them. But if they know you're someone they can reach out to for support, it'll make a big difference.
Right. And that's what the podcast is set out to do, is to make people aware and to get people to become allies so that they can be approached for support as well.
Yeah.
People like me, my neighbors. Yeah, exactly. Because as the podcast is entitled, people who suffer the abuse, they are our neighbors. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. I'd like to take a bit of a break, play some more music from Waterloo Women. This is a group called Act of Nature, who've apparently been around for a while, but I only heard about them for the first time a few days ago. I'd like to play a song from them called I'll Go.
Authentic self with you. Please tell me this could all be coming true. 'Cause I'll go, I will go with you. Let me go, let me go, let me go with you. Into my eyes, see the thoughts disguised.
And fighting to make it all make sense again. Wanting,
is it all I need?
Active Nature, called I'll Go. Active Nature is Laura Eason and Jordan James, and I hope to be inviting them into the studio for a live in-studio performance. I hope to have that happening in a couple of weeks, maybe a month or so. Meanwhile, in the studio, I've got Lillie Proksch and Jenna Mayne from the Women's Crisis Services of Waterloo Region, who are producing a podcast called Is Your Neighbour. And this season, season 4, is called Understanding Femicide. So I'd like to produce a podcast. I'm sitting here behind a microphone, doing radio and turning that into a podcast, which is easy because you're doing half the work. But how do you do your podcast? What takes place?
Yeah, so it's actually quite a long process that we take. We have a lot of factors when it comes to domestic violence survivors, especially when it comes to safety concerns. So usually when we start planning a series, we start about 6 months in advance, reaching out to our potential guests and asking them if they'd be interested in being on the podcast. And then making sure that there are no safety concerns involved. And then we... once we have our kind of lineup of people, we'll do our pre-interviews with people, and then it's our huge 6-month process of doing interviews and writing questions. Like Jenna mentioned earlier, we have our photography component to it as well.
Yeah.
So we work with a local photography, Hillary Gold, and then we have our graphic designer who will do all of our artwork for the season as well, and then we work into our launch.
Right. And that whole process takes about 6 months.
Yeah, about 6 months. It was taking a little longer. Our first 2 series actually had 10 episodes.
Yes.
But we've gone down to 6 now just to make it a little bit more manageable, but then also to really tailor the seasons. So our 3rd season was our first Survivor series, where all of our guests were survivors of domestic violence. And then this series is Understanding Femicide. And with 6 episodes, we really find that we can tailor the seasons and really kind of see a bunch of different facets of what the topic is.
How do you find your guests? Are they people that have made use of your services before?
It's kind of a mix of things. So we have had people reach out to us on social media. One of our guests last season reached out to us over email. She was a past donor, and she had accessed services in a berry shelter. Fallon Farinacci we actually found on Instagram through the Birds Papaya. We had done a little bit of research into her and we found her story, so we reached out to her agent and we found her there. But it's kind of really a mix of things.
Yeah, you've had some big names on the podcast as well.
Yes. Yeah. We're really excited last series for our Survivor series. The opening episode was Anna Maria Tremonti.
Yes, that's what I was thinking of.
Yes. Yeah. It was very, very exciting. We kind of just reached out to her agent as well once we heard about her podcast, Welcome to Paradise. And we just happened to get really lucky with her, but we're really grateful that she was able to be on the series.
Yeah, that's one of the surprising things that I learned, is that somebody as prominent as Anna Maria Tremonti would be a victim of domestic violence. Never even crossed my mind in all the years that I'd been listening to her on the radio. So.
Yeah, I think her story was super shocking to a lot of people, and we thought, we have to get her on the podcast because it really does illustrate, she is your neighbor. It's someone you don't know who this could be happening to, and in her case, she had been kind of hiding this secret for years and years, and yeah, she's still such a strong, powerful woman.
Exactly.
You see her reporting on the news, you don't picture this happening to her, so I think that just kind of shows how kind of insidious it can be and how slow it can sometimes start out too, that sometimes the woman doesn't even know it's happening to her.
Yeah. So how did you reach out to Anna Maria? So you found her podcast and then just emailed her?
Yeah, we reached out through her agent. We also reached out on Twitter. Sometimes that's what we do. We kind of go a few avenues until someone will answer us. But usually I have a pretty good response from people. People are really interested in being on it. And now that we're a little further into it, some people have heard of it or they've seen other guests that have been on it, like Anna Maria, so then they'll be interested.
Right. And then you contact them, and if they're amenable to being on the podcast, do you have people refuse?
Yeah, sometimes we don't get answers. Sometimes I think maybe there might be more of a story there, too, that people aren't ready to share. And as Lillie was saying, it's really important to us to think about safety, too.
Right.
A lot of the time people reach out to us and ask to be on the podcast, but we kind of try and make sure that they are in a safe situation. would never want to put anyone at risk doing this.
Right.
That's really, really important to us. So that's kind of an added layer of difficulty that you might not have with other kinds of podcasts.
I just invite anybody into the studio here.
Yeah.
I've never thought about needing safety to invite people out to a podcast. Mostly it's musicians who want to be out here, getting some publicity. But I guess if I was dealing with a sensitive topic, then that would be a concern as well. So.
Yeah. Something else that's kind of interesting or changed for us during COVID too is we used to do all of our interviews in person. And now we do them remotely, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of nice, though, because then, like, Lillie can sit in, we always kind of joke with our guests that Lily's like kind of the ghost, right? They don't always see her.
But I'm always there listening.
Yeah, she's always there. So, I mean, the new platform, now we use Riverside FM, actually, is kind of the way we make the podcast. So it's nice when we record it, Lillie can come on the screen in the beginning. We're like, this is Lillie, the ghost. And then she goes away and comes back after. So it's kind of nice for the guests to get to know the whole team, too.
Right. And what do the guests have at their end if they're doing it remotely? Because now they're not coming into a studio with good quality microphones and mixing equipment. What do they have?
Well, we're a little bit picky. We do try and make sure that guests do have a good mic. Lillie will send them all the instructions beforehand, recommendations, tell them what kind of browser to use. If they don't have an external mic, we don't like them using their computer mic or headphones. Like, we'd prefer them to have an external mic they could plug in. Right. If not, Lillie will recommend kind of where they can get a mic and set it up. Do you want to add to any of that, Lillie?
Yeah, I think a really interesting thing with being able to use Riverside FM too is that we can kind of interview anyone from anywhere. So in our second series, we actually had a pair of guests who were from BC who run the Moosehead campaign. So thankfully they kind of know the ins and outs of like podcasting and interviews and had their own mic.
Okay.
But often we will ask people to either go to Along and McQuaid and just rent a mic, or we have this tiny little mic that we will mail to people that we can set up remotely, and I will kind of go on to the interview with them beforehand to make sure that everything is set up and make sure that they know what they're doing.
And Riverside FM is an online service that you use to record the podcast.
So we actually heard of Riverside FM through Stuart Reynolds, who's Brittle Star Online. He was in our second series as well. And he had told us that I think it was CBC was using Riverside FM throughout the pandemic.
Oh, really?
So a really cool thing about it is that it records both of the tracks separately and locally.
Oh, that is so nice, yes.
So then it can get downloaded directly into Riverside FM, and then we can take the tracks and use them from there.
Okay. One of the problems that I have in producing a podcast out of the radio show is that it's all mixed into one channel. And so do a lot of editing and splicing to raise and lower levels as necessary. So that would be nice,
Yeah, and we try really hard to not edit the podcast as much as possible. We try to keep these stories as authentic to the guests as possible.
Right.
But if anything does ever happen, it's good to have that option.
Yeah.
You never know when someone will walk in on your call and slam a door, and you gotta cut that out.
Or dogs barking in the background.
Cats walking on the keyboard.
Exactly.
That's my issue. I've got 2 cats at home, so.
And when you were doing them before you had Riverside FM, you had a studio?
No, actually.
No.
So, I mean, when we started this, it was kind of a trial run, too. We didn't know that we were going to end up doing this for many seasons. We thought, we'd just try it out.
Right.
And I actually worked in radio previously, so I had an idea of how we could set things up. But I will admit, we did not have the perfect studio. We did it in a room at Women's Crisis Services, and we'd bring the guests in. We kind of set it up as best as we could and tried to make the sound as good as we could. But, we're a nonprofit, and we couldn't go splurging on a studio space. So we just kind of made it work. And then, and then it's kind of turned into a bigger, better thing than we thought it would. So we're all really excited we can keep it going. It's probably Lillie and my favorite part of our job. So
the quality is good. So
thank you.
Thank you.
When you're airing something from syndicated sources, then you always want to make sure that it sounds professional, and She Is Your Neighbour, the podcast, does sound professional. So well done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's our nightmare is bad audio quality. So speaking our language.
And do you have plans for the future? You've got season 4 wrapped up because You must have all the episodes in the can by now.
Yes.
Yeah, so our next 4 episodes will be airing weekly through our social media channels and on our website.
Okay.
And then from there, we are trying to make She's Your Neighbor as big of a thing as it possibly can be. So we're going to be looking into our next series and choosing the theme, start reaching out to guests. But we're also making She's Your Neighbor more than just a podcast as well. So we currently have a group called Neighbors and Loved Ones, and it's bystander training for community members who are either worried about someone in their life or would like to just generally know about the services that Women's Crisis provides. So that's run by a social worker at request. And that's been really successful so far. We've been able to educate a lot of people about the red flags of domestic violence and how they can reach out if they are worried about someone. We also have a She's Your Neighbor podcast club, which is like a book club, but it's so much better because you don't have to read anything. You just listen to our podcast, and then we all will sit together and we'll chat about it and talk about how we can all be better neighbors to people experiencing violence. And then, we're trying to still figure out what our next steps are going to be. We have a merch line so that we can kind of try to keep this project sustainable since it is through a nonprofit. We don't have much of a budget for it, but we're hoping with our merch and our other ways of doing things, we'll be able to keep it a little bit more sustainable going forward.
And the expenses in producing a podcast are probably largely paying for the online service. And then your time involved in doing the production work.
Yeah, and photography. We are grateful. We're lucky to have sponsors, too. We've had the last few seasons sponsored. So the last 2 seasons were sponsored by Rogers, actually. So that was exciting to partner with them on that. And then the second season, that was the first time we did start getting it sponsored. So we had each episode sponsored by a different sponsor. A lot of local companies here, Magnet, Forensics sponsored. Lots of good local companies kind of willing to pitch in and help us out. So we really appreciate it.
Okay. That's great. How do you go about getting those sponsorships? Do people approach you, or do you go out and beat on doors?
We don't do too much beating on doors. We do have a lot of partners through different events that we already run. We have a few different fundraisers we run through the year. We have committee members from tech and different areas of the community who will come and help us out. So we usually kind of have some connections and then reach out to them to see if they'd be interested with this as well.
Right. Can you give me a ballpark figure? How much does it cost to put on a professional sounding podcast with all the media, the photography, the website? Are we looking at hundreds of dollars an episode, or?
We don't really break it down like that, to be honest with you. I mean, for us, too, it's not really, the podcast is one part of our roles. Lillie and I are really focused on communications and fundraising as well and events. So, it's kind of hard to put a number on it. Everything we do goes back into the organization as well. Okay. We do try and get a lot of grants and sponsorships. So, it's not something we carve out too much room for in the budget. It's something we're able to do through these sponsorships. Okay. So,
have you had any other pickups from radio stations, other syndicated radio stations?
Yeah, so we're also on Midtown Radio. So
of
right
course,
now
yes.
we are the March feature. So every Saturday morning they're playing an episode.
Excellent.
And then we do a little bit with Rogers here and there as our sponsor. And those are the main ones right now.
So to try and get you out on the National Campus and Community Radio Association.
Ooh, yeah,
who
that'd be
have
fantastic.
a series of podcasts on their Earshot website. And so you could get a syndicated spot on there as well.
That would be
and then
fantastic.
get picked up by a bunch of other campus and community stations across Canada.
Oh, yeah.
So, that's actually open to anybody who's producing podcasts. So if you're listening and you've got your own podcast and you want to get it on the air, you can contact Radio Waterloo at office@radiowaterloo.ca with your podcast pitch. Might get syndicated right on CKMS FM. And then if you get on the NCRA website as well, get cross-Canada syndication for your podcast.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's sort of a free service because campus and community stations are always looking for good quality material that mainstream radio stations don't get on the air. So, great. I think it's probably time for another song. Let's see what we've got on the list here. I think I want to play something by Clarissa Diacono. She's got a new song, at least it was a new song last year called Haunted, and she's coming out with a new one, which I don't have access to yet. So we'll play Haunted by Clarissa, and then come back to Lillie and Jenna in just a few minutes.
You say you'll move on from me, I say you won't. They say you talk about me, you say you don't. When you walk out there and you're not aware that I'm watching every move, think you'll get on by leaving me behind. Do you take me for a fool? I'll follow you wherever you go, do it together. I'll haunt you in your wildest dreams. You said we'd be forever, and now you say it's never. I'll haunt you till you start to scream, haunted in your dreams. Now don't you worry about it. You'll figure out that I'm the only one you'll never be without. When you walk out there and you're not aware that I'm watching every move, think you'll get on by leaving me behind. Do you take me for a fool? I'll follow you wherever you go, do it together. I'll haunt you in your wildest dreams. You said we'd be forever, and now you say it's never. I'll haunt you till you start to scream, haunted in your dreams. When you turn around, do you see me? Haunted in your dreams. When you sleep at night, do you feel me? Haunted in your dreams. When you close your eyes, do you see me? Haunted in your dreams. When you dream at night, do you feel me? Haunted in your
Clarissa Diacono with Haunted. It was released sometime in 2022, and she tells me that there's something new coming out, and we'll have her in the studio for that, probably end of April, beginning of May sometime, if the song is ready. We will play no songs before their time. Have in the studio Lillie Proksch and Jenna Mayne from the Women's Crisis Services of Waterloo Region. We've been producing a podcast called Is Your Neighbour. We're into season 4, called Understanding Femicide, which episode 1 will air today at 1 p.m., so stay tuned, don't go away. What can you tell me about the other episodes? What have we got coming up? A quick synopsis of the episodes, if you would.
Yeah, we have some more experts and survivors coming up. So we have an episode coming up with Myrna Dawson, who's probably the best well-known researcher when it comes to femicide in Canada. She's really amazing. So she's for episode 3. So we'll learn a little bit more about kind of what femicide is and more of the research expert side of things. She does have some personal stories / connections in there too. I'm not going to give it all away. I'll have to wait till it comes out. But yeah, that's going to be a good one for sure. Lillie, you want to share about some of the rest?
Yeah, so After that, we have actually a local guest. Her name is Sarah Robertson. So she'll be on the next episode that we release. She is a child welfare worker and really talks about the impact of femicide on children. So children who have grown up specifically knowing someone who was killed. And then we also really get into collateral victims of femicide. So that is people who aren't necessarily the primary target of the killing, but who do end up losing their life anyway. We also are going to be talking to Sophia Aresta, who is the co-founder of a local domestic violence survivor support group called Voices Waterloo Region. And then our final episode of the series, we talked to Marlene Ham. Marlene is the executive director of AWAITH, which is the Ontario Association of Transitional Houses, which is the kind of organization that tracks all of the femicides that happen in Ontario specifically, and then also supports other domestic violence and violence against women organizations throughout Ontario.
Okay, so that's sort of a network of all the different crisis services around Ontario.
Yeah.
I talked to Jen Hutton a few years ago now.
Yeah.
She said that sometimes you coordinate placements of people who are looking for shelter. Is that still happening?
Yeah, for sure. So if there's not space at our shelter, for example, and someone needs emergency shelter right away, then we can connect with another shelter out of the region and see if there's a space for the woman and child to go to there. It's not usually our first choice to move someone out of the region unless it's needed for safety, but usually we like to keep people close to their home in an area that they know. But it is really nice that we have connections with the other shelters so that we're able to do that when we need to.
Yeah. Is Waterloo Region Crisis Services one of the bigger organizations?
Yeah, it's one of the biggest ones in Ontario. Because we do have the two shelters. You know, they began as two separate shelters, actually. So I think a lot of people sometimes know us by our shelter names, which is Haven House and Anselma House, because, you know, we've been around for 45 years now, but back in the beginning, they were each their own separate organization. We amalgamated over 20 years ago now, but still, people, you know, people still remember how Haven House and Anselma House as they were.
And is Waterloo Region's Crisis Services the biggest because there's more need for it, or just because we're particularly well funded for that kind of thing?
I think there's a lot of different reasons. Sometimes it's just the catchment area as well, too. You know, there definitely is a need for it in our region, but that's not to say our region is so much worse than everywhere else. I do think it happens everywhere. I think it's nice that we have the support services here, and the fact that we were able to amalgamate the two organizations kind of helped grow our services as well. But we are also a larger area than a lot of the other areas too. And I think in Toronto, where it's a bigger spot, sometimes they have smaller separate shelters rather than one larger one. So, yeah.
Right. And just to recap, who can take advantage of your services? Who can make use of them?
Yeah, so any women who are experiencing domestic violence, women or trans, non-binary individuals as well. We also support you if you're listening and you need support, and their children. So women 16 plus with or without children who are experiencing any form of domestic violence or abuse. It doesn't just have to be physical violence, could be emotional, financial, psychological.
Right. And then to get a hold of you,
so you can reach us on either of our support lines. So you can call 519-742-5894 or 519-653-2422, or reach out to us on our website at WCSWR.org to talk to us through our anonymous online chat.
Excellent. Okay, we'll have all those links on our show notes page, radiowaterloo.ca/CCC. and point right back at your services.
Thank you so much for doing that.
You're very welcome. And one last quick recap. You're both employees of, so it's not a volunteer organization. It is a non-government funded, through what means? Is it funded through the Ontario government, perhaps?
Yeah, so we receive about 60% of our funding through the Ministry of Children and Community Services through the Ontario government, and the rest of our funding comes through fundraising. So through our generous community here, and probably a lot of people listening are supporters. So thank you so much. There's a lot of programs we run that are entirely community funded, such as our music therapy program. It's entirely funded by the community, and it's one of our most popular programs in shelter. So we do really rely on the community for their support to make this happen.
I bet there's a lot of overlap between community radio listeners and donors to women's crisis services.
Yeah, I would think so. And we're just so grateful for the community. I mean, now that we're back kind of in person, going to events again, it's been so nice for Lillie and I in our roles to go out and see the community and go to events. Just last week was International Women's Day, so we got to go to a few different events and see our supporters there. Bond Park, our podcast friends held an event for us at Princess Cinemas, so that was pretty cool to go see them in person too. So it's been nice to see people again.
Do you have events planned? Things that are upcoming?
Yeah,
Quick
so
rundown?
we have 2 signature events each year. So one of those is called Hats Off to Mom. It's our annual Mother's Day brunch, which we're going to be running for the first time in person since 2019. Ooh. Yes, we're very, very excited. So it's going to be run at St. George Banquet Hall. And
that's North Waterloo?
Yes. Yeah, so we always encourage people to support our moms while treating their moms to brunch on Mother's Day. And it's going to be a really, really great event. We're really excited. We always get Junate, our local musician, to play for us. And we have Angie Hill hosting this year. So we're really excited for that one.
Okay. Sounds great. I was going to bring that up on the screen here, but since I hit the emergency escape button, it's all gone. So it works.
It's good.
All right. I want to thank you both for coming in today and spending an hour with me to talk about the podcast and about the Women's Crisis Services of Waterloo Region. Thank you so much, Jenna Mayne and Lillie Proksch. It's been a very fast hour.
It has. Yeah. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. And you can catch up on the show on our website, radiowaterloo.ca/ccc, or we'll have show notes, our podcast, and there'll be some video of the proceedings in the studio as well. You've been listening to CKMS Community Connections. My name is Bob Jonkman. CKMS Community Connections is produced by Radio Waterloo and sponsored by Radio Waterloo. Executive producer is Jennifer Strong. Contributing producer is Jeff Stager. And you're listening to the theme music, which was written for us by Steve Todd. CKMS Community Connections airs every Monday at 11 o'clock and alternate Fridays at 3 p.m. My name is Bob Jonkman. We'll see you here again next week.